We're studying in the book of Genesis in chapter 37, and we're going through and we're going to follow this wonderful, remarkable man, Joseph. And we're going to see how we are to live in a world that attacks us, that abuses us, that hates us, but all the time keeping your eyes focused on the Creator, the God, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. Last week, we learned about the hatred of Joseph's brothers, how they just hated everything. Well, this week, we're going to see that hate manifested in a manner that is hard for us to comprehend. That kind of hate. You know, hatred is often overlooked. It's an overlooked sin. We have a tendency to justify our hatred or make light of it and not recognize how great of a sin hate is. There was a lady in Philadelphia that in her will, she instructed her executor to take $1 from her estate and invest it and pay the interest of that investment to her husband as evidence of how she estimated his worth. That's hatred. There was another lady in Philadelphia. John's wife is in Philadelphia this week. I hope she doesn't pick up on any of this stuff, Debbie. I'm sure she wouldn't. But this other lady bequeathed her divorced husband $1 to go out and buy a rope to hang himself. Hatred. Hating people is like burning down a house to kill the rat. It's all about, it's inside. It's inside. There's one last little story of an ad in the LA Times for a Porsche 911S for $10. So this guy calls to find out what the real price was. He was convinced that it was a mistake. And the woman that answered the phone said, no, that's the price. And she went on to explain that her husband, the previous month, had taken off with his assistant, and then last week he wired her and said, honey, would you sell the Porsche and send me the money? And so that's exactly what she was doing. You can live a life like that, or you can do like Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington once said, I am determined to permit no man to narrow or degrade my soul by making me hate him. See, God gave us a choice. We can choose to hate those who hate us and allow that hate to be as a cancer and destroy us. Or we can be like Christ upon the cross, who looked down upon those who were crucifying him and said, forgive them. Forgive them. So you see, we have a choice we can make. And when we make the right choice, there's amazing things. You see, forgiveness and love are a very, very powerful tool that totally encompass the armor of God. See, that's our motivation, is love and forgiveness. See, we don't allow the hatred of the world to dissuade us in our love for God or God's people or God's creatures. See, everyone is created in the image of God. You know, it's interesting. We were driving back from the car show yesterday, and we got behind this lady that was decided to take her Sunday drive on Saturday. And she was doing like 15 miles an hour under the speed limit in a 2-lane road so that we couldn't get around her and everything. And I said a few things, and then we started saying, no, wait a minute. She was created in the image of God. And we need to pray for her. Pray for her right foot. No. Exactly. So this is what makes this study so relevant in our life, so powerful in our life, to see Joseph never allowing the hate that is directed towards him to weaken his faith towards his God. God was with him. He trusted God. He grew to trust God. God knew what it was going to take to get Joseph to be the Joseph that he created him to be. Does that sound familiar? I hope it does. Because he's working on you the same way. And we have to learn from Joseph how we deal with these different horrible things that happen in our life. Perpetrated by people, circumstances, and ourselves. But we need to recognize that we, being, as we just got done singing, children of God, that God is doing a work in us. So let's dive in. We're going to be in chapter 37, starting in verse 12. He was loved. Oops. Wait a minute. What's this? What is this? I don't know. What the hotel's going on here? I don't know why that's there. I hope that hope that everything straightens out. Where did that come from? That's really interesting. I had just coordinated this. Okay, let's just read it. Everybody, it's called the Bible. Let's open it up. All right, I usually spoon feed you guys, so now you're going to have to read along with me. Okay, here we go. Now his brothers went to pasture his father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel, who is Jacob, said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said, "Here I am, Father." So he said to him, "Go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he went to him to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Okay, let's stop here for a minute. First off, we see why Jacob loves Joseph. Look at this. He tells him, "I'm going to send you 60 miles to the north, across these mountains and everything, to go to those brothers that hate you." And what does Joseph say? Okay. He says, "Okay, Dad, I'll do it." I mean, put yourself in his position. We already saw last week when he shared his dreams with them, they hated him. And then he shared his other dream with them, and they hated him even more. They detested him. They wouldn't say anything nice to him. So now his dad says, "I want you to take this journey up there and see him." Now stop and think about it for a minute. Why in the world would he send his youngest son when he's got 11 sons up there taking care of his sheep? Because he doesn't trust his 11 sons. But does he see what he's doing? I mean, Jacob is totally blind to this whole interaction that is going on here. They haven't said a nice thing to him for months. Now, how would you feel? How would you feel? I mean, you know me. I mean, if I was told to do something like that, for that 60 miles, I would be gnawing my teeth. And what in the world? Why do I have to go up here? I know what these guys are going to do. They're going to sort of, and by the time I got there, I'd probably break out into a fight right away. But not Joseph. You see, It's really amazing. Let's see how this whole thing plays out. Starting in verse 15, it says, and a man found him wandering in the field. He's looking all over the place. And he says, the man asked him, he says, what are you seeking? He says, I'm seeking my brothers. And he says, tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man says, well, they've gone away. Then I heard them talking about, let's go up to Dothan. And so Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, some have suggested that the brothers moved from Shechem to Dothan with a hidden agenda to check up on the land of Shechem, whose ruler, if you recall, raped their sister, Dinah. So that could be. We don't know, but it does sound kind of like these guys, right? So they saw him from afar. The brothers saw him from afar as he came near to them, and they conspired against him to throw him a party. No, to kill him. Now, these aren't a bunch of big brothers like my big brothers, okay, that set me up to be a fool many times and set me up for failure and just playing dirty tricks on me and everything like that, which big brothers do. These guys were perpetrating premeditated murder. We don't want to underestimate what these guys were doing. See, they were allowing Satan to use them to try to foil any plan that God might have for Joseph and for Israel. Okay? They were tools. They were pawns in Satan's hands. And they were allowing this to happen. See, they saw it as killing any chance of their little brother ruling over them. They weren't going to allow this to happen. They were jealous of them. They envied him because their father set up this whole thing by favoring his son. You see, they overlooked the simple fact that it could have been God that gave Joseph those dreams. You think? I mean, seriously, they didn't even consider that. See, that he gave him two dreams separate that said the same thing, and they didn't even consider that it could have been God giving them a dream. They had their father, Jacob, who had talked to God quite a bit, their grandfather, and their great-grandfather that had talked to God a lot. But these guys were deaf to this whole thing. They didn't consider it whatsoever. Sin was planted in their hearts. You know that sin, that's where sin starts. Did you know that? They said it's the overflow of the mouth, what? The heart speaks. See? It all comes from the heart. And that's where it has to be dealt with. You see, as Christians, we need to strive to surrender ourselves over and over and over again to God that he might change our hearts. See, that's what he does. See, we would like to look at our spouse and say, you know what? You should be like this. Look at her. You should be like her. Well, she's saying the same thing, saying, well, you should be like him. And knowing that neither one of you can get what you're trying to get. What you need to understand is only God can change a heart. And in many counseling sessions that I've had over the years with married couples, I turn to them and I say, now, do you believe that your spouse has the Spirit of God within them? And they, yes. And I said, do you believe that God is the only one that can change a heart? Yes. Then why are you trying to do it? Why are you trying to take God's position? I said, what you need to do is when your husband starts doing something that you don't like, take it to the controller. Take it to his creator and say, God, get him. And you know what? He does. He does. I'm a product of that many, many times. We need to recognize that as Christians, we need to allow God into our life and give him free rein over our thought life, over our actions, over the way we treat people, and when we need to shut up and let God. See, it's simple. It's very simple. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's very simple to understand that God wants to do that in our lives. So we need to do that. We need to embrace that, and we need to do it. So he goes on. I'm going to be missing all kinds of different things here, but that's good. Okay. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. See, that's what they're focused on, is those dreams. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will come of his dreams then. Wow. Wow. These things really got to them, didn't it? It's been said that this is a perfect storm of imperfect behavior. See, you have a mixture of Jacob's divisive favoritism, you have Joseph's dreams, and then you have these brothers with this murderous envy within them, and only God can stop this. Only God can intervene in this whole thing. So, we must ask, why were Joseph's brothers so set on killing their little brother? To find the answer, we must look beyond the brothers, beyond what we see, to what we don't see. Where is our battle? Is our battle with flesh and blood? Then that's the answer. That's the answer. See, this isn't a physical thing between a little brother and his 11 brothers. This is a battle between God and Satan, between God's people and Satan's minions to undermine God's plans. You see? And so we need to recognize that. And when we do recognize that, things start making a little bit of difference in looking at this. The chief reason that envy is an angry resistance to God's decree. Let me reread that. The chief reason is that envy is an angry resistance to God's decree. Meaning, my will, not your will. See, God has decreed what's going to take place in 2 dreams, and he told them. Jacob was wise enough to take it all into his heart and ponder what Joseph had been telling him about his dreams. Satan was using Joseph's brothers and their envy towards Joseph and their hatred towards God to thwart the plan of salvation. You see, these guys can't have God and hatred also. Did you know that? You can't have unforgiveness and grace in the same place. You can't have love and hate in the same place. It's the I can't remember what law it is, where 2 objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time. Well, your soul's the same thing, same way. It works the same way. Either we're going to have God in our lives and grace and mercy and love, or we're going to have hate, murder, deceit, and lies. Okay? Job descriptions, right? And we see who's playing the characters. I don't know where all my stuff is. You guys are just going to have to listen to it just like they do down at the other church. Okay? John Corson points out the similarities here with the Jews plotting to kill Christ. See, he says, in the same way, before they even knew him, before they even knew Jesus, the Jewish leaders had launched their damnable plot to destroy Jesus. It says it in John 5:18. It says, therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him. See, the same as their brothers to kill Joseph. In both cases, those who sought to commit murder were pawns in the hands of Satan. See, trying to undermine a spiritual battle was going on in both of those things. Now, we get to see God's intervention now. See, Satan has been playing this game and thinking that everything is going his way, which he often does, until God shows up. And just to make sure you are perfectly clear about this, it isn't a fair game. It is not a fair game. Satan and Jesus are not on the same level, okay? If you recall, back in the first chapter, second chapter, and third chapter of this book we're reading, it was Jesus that was creating everything. See? And one of his creations was Satan, Lucifer. He was an angel that was created. So there's no comparison here, guys. So when Jesus shows up, when God shows up, game's over. Okay? And that's what we're about to see here. See, they're plotting to kill Joseph. Okay? And God's gonna use an unlikely character. Okay, in verse 21 he says, but when Reuben heard it, Reuben being the oldest son, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let's not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Throw him in this here pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he's thinking, so he could come back and rescue him and restore him to his father. See, Reuben said, okay, let's just throw him in this citron. Let's just throw him in this hole over here and just leave him there. And all the time he's thinking, I'll come back and I'll get him out and I'll take him back to Dad. Okay? Well, Reuben shines here, but Reuben ain't no angel. See, Reuben had committed a wicked sin against his father by defiling his father's concubine. And that unbridled lust showed a sign, showed a heart of depravity. But so we don't know why Reuben is doing this. Why Reuben is stepping in this whole thing. Is the motivation behind this that he might find favor in the eyes of his father? Or it could be that he could maybe be restored back to receiving the inheritance. Because after he did that with the concubine, he was stripped of his inheritance, and Jacob again turned and gave it to Joseph. Ooh. That's just another one of those things that's piling on the tension between the brothers and them. So we don't know what might be his motive behind this. But the brothers listened to Reuben, probably because they respected him as the older brother. And so it goes on and says, so when Joseph came to the brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. Note, the first thing they did was strip him of the symbol of his authority. Okay? They wanted to strip him first of his authority, and then they threw him down into a pit. See, they wanted to remove any sign of who he was and take it away. See, Jacob had lifted Joseph up, and they wanted to tear Joseph down. A cistern is a carved out hole in a rock, and it's made like a bottle. It's got a small opening, and then it goes and opens down, so that the small opening, they can get down and get the water, and the animals can't fall down into the hole. Okay, and so putting Joseph down in there, chances are he couldn't get out. He couldn't escape. It was hopeless. But God. You see, another life lesson here. When you find yourself in a hopeless situation, that's when God does his best work. That's when he gets you to the right place. You're mentally in the perfect place for him to work. All you got to do is call out to him. All you got to do. And we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. You see, he's yelling. They're not listening. But there is someone that did hear him. And we know who that is. God heard his cries. As God hears all of our cries when we cry out to him. See, as his children, he desires to use us in these hopeless situations. When you get a diagnosis that you're going to die, that you've got cancer, that you've got tumors, that you've got whatever it might be, God says, rest in me, and I will give you peace. Trust in me, and I will come through for you over and over and over again. Amen? So, it doesn't always happen in our timing, by the way. A little footnote there. God answers all prayers in his time. Okay? In Joseph's case, it's going to be 20 years. 20 years of different stories we're going to learn about him. But it says that God is with Joseph, and that Joseph never takes his eyes off of God. Can you relate to these situations? I mean, has humanity treated you unfairly or cruel? What makes times like this harder is that when it appears that nobody cares. He's down in this cistern and he's yelling and nobody's hearing him. Have you ever been in that situation where you're crying out and you just want somebody to answer their phone when you call? You just want somebody to reach out with some hope, with some love, with some tenderness. And if there's nobody there, it makes it just that much harder, that much deeper. And that's exactly how Joseph was in here. But God, in his great love, uses these trials and tribulations. It says in James, it says, count it all joy when you encounter trials and tribulations. That's easy for you to say. You've never been in my situation. But the fact of the matter is, God knows. See, as a child of God, you have to realize that how horrible your situation might be, God is going to use that. He's going to exercise that 828. We all know what that 828 says, right? Right? It says what? For those who love the Lord. See, that's the key. See, that God uses all things all things, all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. See, that's exactly what God's doing in Joseph's life. And he wants to do it in your life too. He wants to exercise his miraculous grace and mercy. He wants to form you and make you. You know how they make these beautiful jewels and everything? They put them in a tumbler with a bunch of other rough rocks. And they turn the tumbler on, and it just sits there and boom, 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 boom. And it just keeps going and going and going. That's how God does it with us. He stops it every once in a while and says, I love you, and then turns it back on again. Okay? But when he's done, we're a jewel. We're a precious jewel in his heart. Because he wants to use us. But see, too many times, we lose sight of this. And we allow the circumstances to overrun and override the purpose. See, and you know what one of my sayings about that is that, you know what? If I don't get it this time, I'm going to have to go around this tree again. And he'll keep me going around this tree until I get it. Once I get it, then he'll say, okay, now, Kevin, now you're ready to take this other step. Now you're ready to take on this other job that I have for you, this other work that you wouldn't have known how to deal with before. So, there's a lot in Joseph's life that we can learn from. And God knows. I always say that God knows the combination of everybody's heart. Well, he knows exactly what you have to excuse me, what you have to go through to get you to the place where he needs you to be at a perfect time in space. But these hard-hearted scoundrels didn't listen to the cry of their little brother in the pit. But worse than that, they sat down to eat dinner. That's pretty cold-hearted, don't you think? He's sitting there crying and screaming, and they just sit down, let's have something to eat, guys. And so they sat down to eat. Listen to this, though. These guys might have been hard-hearted, but God was going to use this. F.B. Myers, one of my favorite guys, writes this about these 11 men. Year passed after year, but the years could not obliterate from their memories that look, those cries, that scene in the green glen of Dothan, surrounded by the tall cliffs and overarched by the blue sky, whose expanse was lit up by the meridian sun. They tried to lock out the skeleton in their most secret cupboard, but it contrived to come forth and confront them even in their guarded hours. Sometimes they thought that they saw that agonizing young face in their dreams and heard that pitiful voice wailing in the night wind. The old father who mourned his son as dead was happier than they, who knew that he was alive. One crime may thus darken the whole life. There are some who teach that God is too merciful to punish men, yet he has made the world that sin is its own nemesis. Sin carries with it the seed of its own punishment. And the men who carry with them the sense of unforgiven sin will be the first to believe in a vulture forever tearing out the vitals, a worm that never dies, and a fire that is never quenched. Wow. These guys thought they were getting away with something. They thought that they were doing away with a problem that they had. Joseph. They had no idea that they would live their lives in torment, never allowed to forget what they had done, never crying out for forgiveness. You can't hide from the consequences of sin, folks. Forgiveness, repentance, confession. I should say that in order, shouldn't I? Confession, repentance, forgiveness. That's how we're freed from that. And free indeed you can be if you ask, it will be given to you. Our God is a gracious God, a loving God. He desires us to cleanse our souls from all unrighteousness. All unrighteousness. So he goes on. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum and palm and myrrh, on their way to carrying it down to Egypt. Then Judah, real quick. We're going to keep an eye on this guy, okay? This guy has an amazing turnaround. Talk about a 180-degree move. Judah really does. So he turns to his brothers and says, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come on, let's sell him. Make some money off of him. Sell him to these Ishmaelites. And then in turn, we can turn around and tell Dad that he got eaten by a horrible, horrible animal. And his brothers listened to him. These guys that are coming up the road, we'd call them Arab traders. The family that came from their great uncle Ishmael, the other side of the family. Okay, remember Abraham had 2 sons? Okay, well, this was the other side of the family. And it's hard to reconcile with the way that these guys are talking so flippantly about their little brother that they're going to throw him overboard. You know, why kill him when we can make some money off of him? And we'll give him to our cousins, you know, and let them take him away. The question is, can these guys be saved? What do you think? Is there any hope for these guys? There's always hope, right? But they got a life to live with this horrible thing that they're about to do. Then in verse 28, then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. In this passage, you might pick up that the Ishmaelites and the Midianites are the same. They're the same thing. It's just the Midianites is where they live. Ishmaelites is who they are, okay? And so understand that. And here again, we see a similarity, do we not, between Jesus and Joseph? You remember Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver by who? By Judah. Okay? Where Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver by Judas. The same name. It's the same name. Same root name. Coincidence, I guess, huh? Now Reuben wasn't around when they did this. So now he comes back. And it says, Reuben returned to the pit. He returned to fulfill what his plan was. Well, he saw that Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes into mourning. He went back and he says, the boy is gone. And where shall I go? You see, Him being the oldest was held accountable and held responsible to take care of all of the other brothers. And he had blown it, and he knew it. And he's saying, you know, after all that I had done to hurt my dad, now this, where do I go now? I can't go home. That's what he's thinking. Wow. Wow. And none of them showed remorse, except for Reuben. But then again, we don't know. We're saying, why does he have remorse? Is it because of Joseph? Or is it because he sees that he's just that much further from the inheritance that was offered him? So, then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, listen how cruel this is. This we have found. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not. Wow. Cold. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol, down to the place of the dead, to my son mourning. And the father went away weeping for his son. One lie leads to another lie. One falsehood leads to another falsehood. It all started in the garden. It all started in the garden when Satan told Eve, did God really say that? He really just doesn't want you to be like him. A lie from the prince of lies. And it's no different. He hasn't changed a bit. He keeps training up people to lie. Have you ever met someone that just lies all the time? And you catch them in these lies and you go, why did you lie about that? You didn't have to lie about that. But they do because they're liars. Liars lie. Just like sinners sin. You see? It comes naturally. See, did the brothers do this to punish Jacob for the way that he loved Joseph? I mean, what was their heart behind this whole thing? It seems that way, but we don't know. We'll have to follow the story through to find out. And then it says in the final verse, it says, then meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. See, we're going to see the 828 playing out time after time after time through this whole thing. See, the thing is that the understanding is that Joseph trusts the Lord. He believes that the Lord will never leave him nor forsake him. Do you believe that? Are you living your life with that truth? Knowing that God, I talked about this last week, but I'll be talking about it a lot, folks. If we believe that God is omnipresent, that means he's everywhere, all the time. Okay? That means that, and he's omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing. Okay? So, he knows our thoughts. But you know what? Like I said before, he knows our thoughts, but we're thinking them, and he's standing right there going, I can help with this. I know how this is going to work out. Now, if you listen to me, I can help you. But how many times do we not? Think, I got this one, Lord. I got this one. Watch out. That's when the traps pop up. And you find yourself in situations that you stop and you say, if I only had turned to the Lord. So, let's walk away today and let's consciously exercise the truth that God is everywhere all the time, and He loves us regardless of the decisions that we make, of the things that we do.